turn it off. Welcome everyone. I'm Sally Hill, and on behalf of the Executive Committee and all the members of the Women's Philanthropy Board, we're so pleased to have you with us today. This is actually the 7th annual Spring Symposium. It's hard for me to believe because in some ways it seems like just yesterday that a group of women decided that this would be a very good idea. And the time has sort of flown, but when you think about it, it's only been 7 years for an organization that's gone a very long way. Years pass so quickly when we're busy and doing some good works and meeting new people and educating women and hopefully inspiring women. Time passes very quickly, and we've had a great deal of fun as well. It's absolutely amazing how this organization has grown, and you'll hear a lot about that today. The theme for today, well, actually it's been the theme for the year, navigating the challenges in today's economy, preserving wealth, and pursuing philanthropy. About a year and a half ago, when this theme was decided upon, we had absolutely no idea that the conditions that exist today would. So it could not be more relative. And I think during the course of today, you'll hear so many different speakers, and hopefully they're all going to leave with a lot more knowledge and understanding, and our curiosity hopefully will float to the top, and you'll ask some questions if you have. But I think it's going to be a very stimulating day. I really thank the committee for organizing this. You've done an outstanding job. This is a great deal of work, it really is, and special thanks to Sydney James Nakajavan, who's in the back. She works 20 out of 24 hours, 7 days a week, and I know that from personal experience. Thanks to all of you who are here today. This continues to grow. It's just every year it gets better and better and better. I do want to mention, I'm sure you saw all the business and professional expos out there. We're delighted. This is sort of a new thing for us with the Women's Symposium. It started actually, we had a few at the winter board meeting, and it's expanded, and so please go by and visit these people, give them some of your time. It's a whole array of interesting things out there. You are going to have just really one choice to make today, and that's it for 9 o'clock, whatever. We have 2 concurrent sessions. Everything is in this. There's a great deal of information in this, so take a look at it. In this is also a review of everything that's happened in this year, beginning with last fall. We've had the fall luncheon, the winter board meeting, and now the spring symposium, but in between those, almost every single month, something was going on, either here on the Auburn campus or surrounding areas. So this group has been very, very busy. I want to introduce Jeannie Holloway, who's going to start our program, and she's going to introduce a speaker who I think you will find so interesting and certainly going to speak about something we all need to know more about.
Good morning. My name is Jeannie Holloway, and I'm very proud to be a member and on the executive committee of this wonderful organization, the Women's Philanthropy Board. And I'm here right now to introduce a very good friend of mine, Leura Canary. Leura Canary grew up in Uriah, Alabama, in southern Monroe County. She attended Huntington College and the University of Alabama School of Law. Ms. Canary worked as an assistant attorney general in the Alabama Attorney General's office from 1981 to 1990. She was a trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. from 1990 to 1994. And as an assistant United States attorney in the United States Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Alabama in Montgomery from 1994 until 2001. On September the 4th, 2001, she was appointed interim United States Attorney for the Middle District of Alabama and was presidentially appointed and confirmed by the U.S. Senate on November the 6th, 2001. Since 2005, Ms. Canary has been chair of the Attorney General Advisory Council's Working Group on Child Exploitation. Ms. Canary's recognition of the growing problem of sexual exploitation of children on the Internet led her to spearhead and draft a proposal for a national child exploitation prevention program. The program, called Project Safe Childhood, or PSC, was adopted as a national priority program of the Department of Justice and formally implemented by the U.S. Attorney General on May the 17th, 2006. PSC employs a multifaceted approach to lower the incidence of sexual exploitation of children, including increased federal prosecution and increased education of law enforcement and the public of the dangers to children. Ms. Canary is consulted regularly by the Department of Justice Office of Legislative Affairs and the Office of Deputy Attorney General in Washington, and advises them concerning various proposed legislation and issues that have arisen during the implementation of this program. Ms. Canary also personally leads the Child Exploitation Task Force in the Middle District of Alabama and is closely involved in developing the investigative and prosecutive resources to bring those who would harm children in this district to justice. Ms. Canary is married to William Canary. The Canaries have 2 children, Will, 15, and Margaret, 10. Please welcome Ms. Canary and give her a warm welcome. She's my friend, and we're so happy to have her.
Thank you, Jeannie. I appreciate that very nice welcome. Good morning, everybody. I'm Leura Canary. I should move this slide so you can see who I am. I'm Leura Canary. I'm the United States Attorney for the Middle District of Alabama. I've held this position for about 7.5 years. I've been very privileged to be able to serve the Middle District of Alabama, and although my tenure is coming to an end, I'm still enjoying my job very much every day. Today we're going to talk about finding your philanthropic passion. And this is my personal story of how I became involved in the fight to end child sex exploitation. Primarily, we focus on the internet, but all these areas are intertwined, and that's what I want to let y'all know today. It's a relationship between the molestation of children, the sexual exploitation of children, and the internet. And as you might guess, I'm going to talk to you about how I found my passion, but I'm also going to talk to you a lot about my passion, because I want you to all know about this problem and get more heads working on solving this issue. Just so you'll know a little bit about me, I've been a U.S.Attorney since September 4th, 2001. I've been a lawyer since 1981, and I'm a career public servant. I spent almost 10 years in the Alabama Attorney General's office, and I've been with the Department of Justice for 18.5 years. I was a career Department of Justice lawyer before I became U.S. Attorney. I gave up my career status to serve in a political appointee position, but at heart I am a public servant and always have been. This is the area of my responsibility. The colored counties up on the map, the 23 counties there on the right side of the screen, are the Middle District of Alabama. There are about 1.1 million people in the district. The largest population centers are Montgomery, Lee County, and Houston County, as you might guess. And of course, Auburn University is in my district. We have courthouses in Montgomery, Dothan, and Opelika. Dothan and Opelika are unmanned courthouses, and our office is in Montgomery. There are 93 U.S. attorneys in the United States. There's one for each federal judicial district. So Alabama happens to have 3 districts. That's just a happenstance in history. There are many large states that have only 1 U.S. attorney, so we're one of the ones that has multiple ones. This is what we do in a nutshell. This is a very sort of truncated version of what our duties are, but we are really the head of the United States law firm for this 23 counties. We do criminal work, but a lot of people don't realize we do a lot of civil work as well. We defend all civil lawsuits filed against anyone in the Middle District of Alabama, any federal employee or federal agency. We handle bankruptcy for the United States, financial litigation, collections, asset forfeiture. We sue on behalf of the United States for financial judgments. We handle all the Social Security appeals. We also prosecute every federal crime that occurs in those 23 counties. And that's what we're most known for. We're the main prosecutors for the United States. And we handle primarily, this is a list of what our office handles. There are many offices that we all have the same jurisdiction, but you have more of one kind of crime than another depending on where you are. We handle a lot of gun crimes, drug crimes, public corruption, white-collar crimes, tax crimes, immigration, We have federal lands. We have two large military installations in our district, Maxwell Air Force Base and Fort Rucker. And we also have Indian lands and other national parks and other federal lands where we handle all the crimes that occur on those particular installations. We do violent crimes, including bank robberies, and child exploitation. I have to highlight that, of course, because that's my favorite. Okay, who has time for a passion? Y'all are all in the same boat I'm in. Everybody, those of you who are students, have a full plate with your personal life and your study. People who have a full-time career have full-time professional obligations, and also you have lots of personal obligations. And I sort of felt like this before I found child exploitation. I had a lot of work I was doing. It was all important. I felt like I had been serving the public my entire life. What did I need to pick out one thing to work on for? Why did I need to have a passion? Well, I didn't find it, it found me. And what happened was, pretty early on in my tenure as U.S. Attorney, I was presented with a case that troubled me. And I couldn't exactly put my finger on why it troubled me, but I'll tell you a little bit about the case so you can kind of understand where I was coming from. It involved what was then a 21-year-old young man, and he was 19 when the offense occurred, so it was a very young defendant. He was from a middle-class background, nice parents, church-going people, really well-meaning people, not people who had been in trouble with the law in any way, shape, or form, and really upstanding people in their community. The young man was caught with a large collection, a troubling collection of child pornography, not just a few pictures that he claimed he accidentally stumbled across. He admitted that he had become interested in this area, and he had collected quite a large number of pictures, and some of them were quite bad, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. The case was brought to my office for prosecution. He probably would have just gotten probation had he been convicted because it was his first offense, and because at that time the penalties were not particularly stiff for child pornography possession. His lawyer came to me and met with me personally and said, this is a nice young man, you don't want to ruin his life, you need to give him pretrial diversion. Well, had I given him pretrial diversion, he would have had absolutely no blemish on his record. If he completed the program successfully, he would have gone on with his life without any impediments to any type of work or profession. But I found out he was in school to become a teacher. And that's the part that troubled me. So I didn't know what to do. I was trying to decide what would serve justice. That's my first job and my first duty in this position, is to serve justice and to do what's right. And sometimes what's right is not really obvious, and sometimes what's right may seem to be to other people not to be the right thing. So I had to try to figure out in my mind what justice was. And part of justice is determining what's the public interest in this. I felt sorry for that defendant. I felt even sorrier for his parents. I felt very bad about the whole thing for them because I'm not an unsympathetic person. But my duty was to protect the public interest, not just to feel sorry for that young man. Well, let me go back. How bad a crime was this? Did he just have a bunch of pictures? Did he pose a threat to society? And particularly, did he pose a threat to children? And those are the kind of questions I had to answer in order to decide what to do with this case. So what did I do? I tried to look at some data. I did some research on this type of crime and the threat it posed. But the truth is there wasn't a whole lot out there. I went to some FBI agents who had worked this area for a long time and asked them if they had any studies at their disposal. And in fact, found that there was such a study. It had not yet been published. It was preliminary. And that study showed that there was a very strong correlation between the possession of child pornography and the hands-on offending of child molestation of children. So I learned, much to my somewhat surprise, that it wasn't a matter of people just collecting these pictures. As the FBI agent explained to me, and I think it made the most sense of any explanation I've ever heard, if someone has a sexual interest in adults, they have pictures of adults. If someone has a sexual interest in children, they have pictures of children. And what often happens is people think that these are just pictures. And part of my research was to determine what kind of crime is this? How bad a crime is this to possess child pornography? And that's what I continue to do as I look at these different areas. And what surprised me was there wasn't a lot out there on this. There wasn't a whole lot of studies done, and the studies that have been done were danced all around the issue. It never really reached conclusions. As I continue to do research and talk to people with expertise in this area, I found a number of things. And let me say this too, I actually talked to, there was a psychologist engaged by the defendant to assess his personal risk of offending at some point. And what that psychologist concluded was, he interviewed him and he said, well, I don't think he will offend. And I talked to the psychologist. They gave me permission to call the psychologist and discuss this case with him. And I said, can you really tell me whether he will offend or not against children? And he said, no, I can't. I said, I don't think he will, but that's from my assessment of it. I said, well, what do you base that on? Well, I discussed with him whether he wants to offend or not. He said he didn't, and so, I believe him. I think he's a pretty good kid. So I said, but do you know anything about whether he has a compulsion to offend? And he says, well, no. He obviously has an interest in children. He wouldn't have these pictures if he didn't. And I can't tell you whether he'll offend or not. So I continue to do research, and these are some of the things that I found as a result of all this research. And ultimately what I decided to do in that case was I allowed the young man to plead guilty to possession of child pornography at the local level, not in federal court. He has a sex offender status on his record. He cannot be a teacher. I didn't think it was safe after what I found for him to be a teacher. I had to weigh the public interest, and having had him come through the system, I thought it would be irresponsible of me to allow someone to go into the teaching profession when it's a known fact, I found out, that people who have an interest in sexually abusing children often go into those professions that put them in contact with children. And what I found since we started prosecuting these cases is we have prosecuted in the Middle District of Alabama alone in the last couple of years ministers, and I use that plural, youth ministers, teachers, multiple instances of teachers, lawyers, doctors, just about anyone else. And then the others usually have some contact with children. They may be a coach of a youth baseball league, or they almost all have some contact with children in some way. So you can't say, well, this man is a minister, they're from a nice family. You cannot determine whether someone's a danger to children by their status in life or by their class or by their education. And that's what makes this such an insidious area. But what I found out is that child pornography is not just pictures. Child pornography are images of child sexual abuse. It used to be that there were this limited number of pictures out there, that people created the pictures like in Eastern Europe. Y'all probably all have this idea of these Romanian girls. They used to be fairly mild, usually 13, 14-year-old children in more or less benign poses, naked of course. But they had to be made with film, they had to be developed, it was a very underground thing, and the same images were passed around year after year because they were very difficult to make, very difficult to get. And in fact, at one point, the Postal Inspection Service, who used to be very involved in this because the only way you could get child pornography usually was in the mail, they had almost abolished child pornography because they had done such a good job of enforcing it and confiscating it from the mail system. But then along came the internet. And along came digital technology. So that now anybody with a digital camera in this United States can molest their child and put it up on the internet. And they can do it live streaming on webcams, and they can do it with video and put it up there, and they can share it without going peer-to-peer. There are all kinds of ways now to create child pornography and share it that escape detection. And now what we're seeing are just vastly increased numbers of images, new images constantly. We had this, as part of this program, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children set up a particular unit to identify child victims. And y'all probably have seen on the news some of the more infamous cases, but I can tell you there are thousands for everyone you've seen on the news. But the fellow who was a weightlifter, and he had abused his children, and someone had found the pictures on the internet. He had fled to, I think, Thailand or some other country, and he was ultimately caught relatively recently. But those pictures had shown up all over the world. And in other presentations, I could show you, like, we have victims we know, and the pictures were made this year. We can show you that those pictures show up in 1,000 different places around the world within a year of the molestation. So this child is not only abused when the pictures are made, this child is re-victimized every time those images are spread around the internet and viewed by other pedophiles or people with sexual interest in children. So the possession of child pornography is not, as many people used to think, and I used to think myself, just pictures. It's not benign. It is a very heinous act. And I think one of the things we need to get out there is to the public is this is a bad thing. You don't need to do this. We also found out that people who collect child pornography are often child molesters. That's the study I told you about. That study has been updated and it's published this month in the Journal of Family Violence, and I'll give you a few highlights from that in a minute. This easy access to child pornography through the internet has caused a proliferation, and the images have become so horribly graphic that I have yet to look at any of them. I don't need to look at them. I hear about the descriptions. All I have to hear about is the description of the rape of a 9-month-old baby. I don't need to see those pictures. But I can tell you that the pictures have gotten horrifically bad. They involve younger and younger children. It used to be uncommon to find children under who were pre-pubescent. Now in every collection we find toddlers, infants, 3 and 4-year-olds, children who are screaming with pain. We have videos with the sound, and I don't mean to be graphic and upset all of you, but people need to know how bad this is. These video clips we're finding are not just benign video clips, they are the rapes of children with the sound imposed. One of the reasons, one of the things that became a problem early on in this area is we started increasing federal prosecution. We had to implement a program to help those prosecutors protect their mental wellness because of the rigors and stress of prosecuting these cases. That's one of the reasons there weren't more prosecutions. People don't want to work these cases, not because they're bad people, but because it is so emotionally draining and difficult to work with these images and see what's going on with these children. Also on the internet, another insidious thing we're finding out is now there are communities of people who have sexual interest in children who exchange information, exchange pictures, encourage each other, tell each other how smart they are, how everyone else is so ridiculous because this conduct should not be illegal. They've even started, in some instances, movements to legalize sex with children. So the internet has allowed all that, because before that people were more or less ashamed. It used to be several years ago when we would execute a search warrant to uncover child pornography, often, and I mean fairly frequently, the person with a child pornography would commit suicide. That rarely happens now. It did happen not too long ago in one of our cases, but it shows that these people still have a conscience, still realize that they know what they're doing is wrong, whereas most of the time now people say, there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing. And that's partly because of this exchange of ideas on the internet among these offenders. Also, child pornography is used for other purposes other than just for people viewing it. It's used to entice children, to groom children. Children are shown these images to make this conduct seem normal and to groom them for the abuse. It's used to silence children, to tell them, if you tell anyone, I will send this picture to your parents or tell you what, show them what you've been doing. It's used to blackmail children and adult and young people. This includes teenagers. And I'll tell you about one case out of here in Auburn in a minute. I'm going to hurry on, where the perpetrator used images to blackmail others into doing what he wanted them to do. So child pornography is in itself an evil thing. And I can't, in this age of relativism, I can't say it. We don't often say that word evil, but I can tell you this is evil. And I've seen evil, and this is evil. So what else did I learn when I was doing these things? There's insufficient enforcement of this crime. It's a crime that is allowed to proliferate because people, and I'm the same way, we didn't want to talk about it, we don't want to think about it, we don't want to recognize that it's there because it's so unpleasant and so difficult. I found one of the reasons there's insufficient enforcement, though, too, is these cases use a tremendous amount of forensic resources. And what I mean by that is you cannot prosecute a child pornography case when the internet's involved without computer forensic technicians who can analyze computers and testify at trial about what their findings are. You also can't prosecute one without sophisticated prosecutors who understand technology and understand the internet. And that takes a lot of training, a lot of experience, and that just didn't exist in large part in many places. Now, there were some places that were ahead of the curve and had done a great job, but by and large throughout the country, it was more common for there to be a lack of these resources and a lack of these prosecutors than not. So especially here in Alabama, I found that we didn't have the know-how, the training, or especially on the local level, to handle these cases. There's a lack of public awareness. People didn't know this was a problem that it is. And often law enforcement were just like the rest of the public. We have local law enforcement officers who would never allow the molestation of a child to go uninvestigated, but they didn't realize that that molester also had a lot of child pornography on their computer, and that case needed to be handled too, because it might lead to the prosecution of others. As I said earlier, the just pictures syndrome, I cringe when people say, but they're just pictures. But that's what a lot of people still believe about child pornography. And all of this what created what I consider to be an unacceptable risk to children. And that's what got my blood boiling and got my passion stirred. So I became the chair. I started talking to people about this, and they started knowing me as that, well, Laura, she likes child pornography. Not that way, but I was the prosecutor who was interested in this area. And frankly, there weren't a lot of us interested. So by default, I became the chair of the national chair of the Child Exploitation Assembly Working Group, and drafted, along with my former first assistant, who should get credit as well, a proposal for this national program. And we set out these problems and said, this is why we need a national program. It became a priority of the Department of Justice, and I understand the new administration, I've been told, is going to continue this as a priority of their administration, for which I'm very grateful. The last figures I had were that since 2006, there's been a 33% increase in federal prosecutions in this area, and I expect those to continue to rise exponentially, because it takes a lot of work at the front end to get the resources in place and people trained to do these cases, so I expect much greater numbers than that as the program continues. These are the components. We have partnerships, federal, state, local law enforcement. We participate in coordinated national initiatives to investigate cases where we find, for instance, someone selling child pornography. We'll get the list of the customers who obtained it and then send them out to be investigated. We have increased federal prosecution of child exploitation, and really the result too is there's increased local and state prosecution, because part of this is the training of state, local, and federal law enforcement officers. We also want to increase public awareness. I'll briefly go through some of these. I've got to move on quickly because I want to tell you about a few cases. We've had more federal prosecutions, as I said, increased funding for Internet Crimes Against Children task forces, a child victim identification unit formed at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We've had national Project Safe Childhood conferences in 2006, 2007, 2008, and each one is larger than the one before. We can hardly even accommodate all the people who are interested now. And they've actually had some television and radio ads y'all may have seen. I don't know if y'all remember seeing the one about the girl who had her picture and it showed up everywhere. She tried to take it down and it would pop back up. That was one of our ads, because part of it is we're trying to also encourage young people to be safe on the internet as well. This is a study out that got me started on this whole issue, and this is the follow-up study that was more detailed, and it's been published this month. It was completed in 2006. There were two prison psychologists at the Federal Correction Institute in Butler, North Carolina, and they ran the sex offender treatment program. And they studied 155 prisoners who were convicted of child pornography possession or distribution offenses only. And they followed up on this earlier study, which is the earlier studies what I had seen before. And what they found in this study is that sentencing, almost 21% had admitted to contact sex offenses with children. And some of those had, a few of those had, 20 of those of the 40 had prior convictions for contact offenses. So they were not just admitting it, they had been convicted of it. But the other 20 admitted in their pre-trial, their pre-sentencing investigation that they had actually molested children. But 115 of the 155 said, no, we've never molested children. We've just, all we have is pictures. We've never molested children. We'd never do anything like that. And the ones who admitted having had sexual contact with children admitted to sexual contact with 75 victims, or 1.88 victims per offender. After treatment, they had a fairly extensive treatment. They volunteered for the treatment, and some people say that makes the study not reliable. I'm not so sure about that, but I don't know how else you study these people without knowing they're convicted of possession of child pornography, because people aren't going to volunteer for these kind of studies. But afterwards, 24 still said it was just pictures, they had never molested, where 131 admitted to contact sex crimes against 1,777 victims, an average of 13.56 victims per offender. But let me tell you, of that 24, they were polygraphing people to substantiate. These weren't just admissions. They actually polygraphed them to say, are you telling the truth when you say you've molested these children? Of those 24 who still said it was just pictures, 9 were polygraphed, of that 24, and only 2 of those 9 passed. So if you extrapolate, it's probably more like 95 or 96% who had actually had contact sex crimes, as opposed to the just 85% that they found. But whether it's 85% or 90% or 95% or 82%, the conclusion is there's a very large percentage of people who collect and possess child pornography who are a danger to children. And that's the way these cases should be treated, in my opinion. And just for fun, I'm about to run out of time, but there's a teen internet safety study, and the bottom line of the study is most teens get contacted by strangers online, and most teens don't think there's anything wrong with them putting their personal information online, and most teens think that their parents have no idea what they're doing online, which is true. But it's also true that if we talk to our children about online safety, fewer of those teens engage in risky behavior. So we can do something about the safety of our children, and I didn't want to leave y'all with hopelessness. But let me tell you about a few cases that we've handled since Project Safe Childhood started, just in our district. This is just a handful of dozens. And before we started this program, we maybe had handled 3 of these cases in 5 years, and we're handling 40 and 50 a year probably now, but the only reason we're limited is because of the investigative resources and not because of the cases that are out there. So I wish we could do more, and we're trying to do more. The case of a defendant named Brown out of Dothan, Alabama, he was in his early 20s. He went online, he would pose as a woman and get 13, 14-year-old boys to talk to him. He would say he was actually a 22-year-old woman, and then he asked them to send pictures of their private parts via webcam to him. He would record those on the other end and then turn around and say, if you don't do the following sex acts for me on the webcam, I'm going to take this picture of your private parts. I know where you go to school, I know who your friends are, I'm going to send it to everybody you know. And he did that. In fact, in one instance, it was two friends who were best friends. They were not gay. He had them perform sex acts on each other. Those were some of our victims. The victims' mothers came and testified at the sentencing. He actually pled guilty to a sentence of 40 years. One of the most egregious things that he did was, and he had all his tapes, that he taped the webcam transmission he got. He labeled them blackmail of, and he put the child's name. He said he did this because he was actually harassed as a child, and he said he was doing this to get back at people for what was done to him as a child. But he actually encouraged a man in one video that we found in his possession to rape his 9-month-old baby. And we have that tape, but we could never find the child. So we don't know where that child is. That child still is in danger. Another case we handled is sort of an unusual case. I included it in the list because it's a fellow named Hoey Morris who had long been the scourge of his town, Eclectic, Alabama. And he had been accused of all sorts of things, of molesting girls and giving drugs and liquor to young people for years and years and years, and was a pretty bad guy. But what he had been doing for years, he had a little money, and he had been traveling to Thailand and Vietnam to have sex with young girls. So we convicted him of a number of offenses, including child sex tourism, which is sort of unusual. And there were only like 24 successful prosecutions in the country the year we did this, and we had one of them. This fella got 75 years in jail. He's still awaiting sentencing on a visa fraud charge. We threw everything at him. We had gun charges, we had drug charges, we had child sex tourism, visa fraud, passport fraud. Because he changed his name, he got banned from Vietnam, he changed his name to keep going there. So this is a guy who lived in Eclectic. A fellow named Vance from Auburn. Went to church with a bunch of people and thought they were his friends, but he posed as like a secret admirer of young women, some underage, some not, on the internet, and he would pose these 10 risque questions to them. And if they answered, he'd use that information and say, I know where you go to church, I know where you go to school. And in fact, it was true in most instances because he did go to church with a number of his victims. That he would threaten them and then have them do sex acts again over the internet via webcam. And he had over 200 victims. And in fact, we jointly prosecuted him with another district because there were so many victims in that case. And there were a number of victims probably in this community as well. Jerry Allen Penton, it's a fellow who we had to go to trial. He wouldn't admit he did anything wrong. We had to take him to trial. He did not plead guilty. But he molested 2 little girls aged 6 and 8. We went in and found that he had a large collection of child pornography, no surprise. And he worked for a company. The company kept calling us and asking us for his computer back, but he had lots of child pornography even on his company computer as well. He faces life in prison because of the molestation and the number of images that he had. He had thousands of images. A fellow named Mitchell out of Andalusia, he established a cyber sex relationship with a 15-year-old girl over the internet. She thought he was 23. He was in fact 46. He went and picked her up at her home in Florida. They were both living in Florida, but he took her to his hometown, Andalusia, raped her in a hotel, and then y'all may have heard about this, dropped her off at a Walmart in Definiak Springs. And there had been an Amber Alert issued for this child, and that's when he got panicked, and that's when he dropped her off. So we ended up prosecuting him, and he's agreed to a sentence of 30 years. Another fellow named Dean, he was in Montgomery. He had molested his stepdaughters for many years. I'm being called on time. But the bottom line was he recorded every act of molestation on video of his victim. And I have to tell you about the others another time. I was going to leave some time for questions, but I think I'm out of time. But I'll be happy to talk to anyone who has questions afterwards. I want to go to my last slide. The bottom line is, this is how you find your passion. Take advantage of your position in life. I was very fortunate to be a U.S. Attorney and to be able to do something about this problem in the position I had. Pay attention to what grabs you, and this is what grabbed me. Read, research, learn from experts about the area that you're interested in, and don't listen to naysayers. If I had a nickel for every time someone said, we can't prosecute our way out of this problem, I'd be a rich woman. But I still think just because we can't cure the problem, we should give up. I tell them, well, just because we'll never stop murdering doesn't mean we're not going to prosecute murderers. So I don't listen to naysayers, and I advise you not to as well. But thank you very much for your attention, and I appreciate it.